Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you're listening to us from. Welcome to another episode of Footprints Podcast, a podcast through which we tell the stories and glean the wisdom of our elders. And today we are absolutely privileged to have Bisi with us. Bisi is a sister, a friend. She's one of those women who when I was growing up in the feminist movement, I used to look at with such, I want to be like her. Like, when will she remember my name? And one day she called me by my name. And it's such a big thing. But yeah, I know when we're big like that, we don't know that even just remembering a person's name of a person who admires us, for them, it's a big thing. For you, it might be that. But yeah, you used to come to Uganda and would all get excited because you were for us an embodiment of the brave, the bold, the big that we wanted to be, that we could be. And you showed us that, yes, women can. So without telling your story for you, Bisi, please tell us a bit about yourself and welcome to Footprints.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for that graceful introduction. It is a delight to be back here in Uganda. My name is Bisi Adeleye Fayemi. I'm from Nigeria, and I am a gender specialist, women's rights activist, a policy advocate, a communication specialist, and a writer. I have quite a number of identities, but I think I will stick to those and for now. I was born to parents who were living in the United Kingdom in the 1960s. I was born in 1963 to be exact. My father was a student at the time, and my mother was working to support the family. And in 1969, December, I went back to Nigeria with my parents. I was a very precocious little child. And I remember that when I was enrolled, I started primary school in Liverpool, where my parents were living. And then when we moved back to Nigeria, I was enrolled in primary school. And after 6 months, the headmistress called my parents and told them they were going to move me to another class, that I was way ahead of my peers in the class they enrolled me in. So they moved me to another class, and after another 6 months, they moved me again. I was an avid reader right from when I was a little girl. And there was a time, I think I was 7 then, when I won a prize for being the best read student in the school, because I was always going to take books out of the library, and the teachers were so impressed. And I didn't think it was a big deal. I loved reading stories, fairy tales, all those things. And back then our parents were always looking for ways to keep us occupied. We did not have all the gadgets and things that kids have these days, the video games and endless hours on computers or phones. So you either played outdoor games with other kids in the neighborhood, or you stayed home, did your homework, and watched television. So even though we were allowed to watch television, it was restricted.
Yeah.
So my father made me write essays twice a week.
Oh my goodness.
Every Tuesday and Thursday. And he would read my essays and grade them.
Wow.
He would discuss them with me. He would want to know, because I could write the essays on anything I liked. So he would want to know why I wrote the essays and what was my thinking process like. I would explain to him, and he would ask questions. I would respond to them. I didn't know then that was the beginning of lessons in critical thinking, in using my voice, both in terms of how I thought, but also in terms of how I expressed myself, because I would have to defend whatever it was I had written to him. And then he started showing my essays to his friends who would visit, because he was so proud. And then he would take them to work. I remember I started writing those essays when I was around 7. So from the age of 7, 8, 9, 10, he would take them to work and show anyone who want to listen.
Yes.
She's only 8, she's only 9, she's only 10. So when I was 10, I went to what we call secondary school. It was a boarding school in Abeokuta, which is 2 hours from Lagos.
That was young, though.
I was young.
Huh.
I was young. But remember, like, yes, I was precocious. Yes. So I went to secondary school when I was 10, was boarding school. My mom was rather reluctant, but my father felt that I could do it. And I had a strong sense of adventure even back then. So I wanted to, go out in the world and, to, live with other little girls. Yeah. So I went to boarding school, so I didn't have to write the essays anymore. But when I came home on holiday, school vacations, I did have to write them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But looking back now, that is where my passion for writing began. And so these days, when people tell me, ask me about how and when I started to write, I tell them I don't want to sound like those artists and creative persons who tell you, oh, I started doing this when I was 2 years old or 3 years old. I did start writing from a young age. And I had a close relationship with my father. I loved my mother too, but my mother was a typical conservative African woman who just wanted you to be brought up as a nice, nice girl who would go on to be, a good wife to someone. And she would always tell my father, stop encouraging her to talk so much, because no man would want a woman who is so opinionated. And my father would tell my mother, any man who doesn't want my daughter to express herself is not worthy of her. And so those approaches that my father had to raising a girl, to allowing me to express myself and to feel entitled to an opinion.
Yeah.
It gave me a lot of confidence, and it prepared me for what life would be like. And that is why today, when I talk to people about the rights of women, I tell them that it starts from the way we raise our children, the way we raise our girls, for them to be confident and, know that they can hold their own anywhere and not feel intimidated. And then the way we raise our boys, raise them to have a sense of responsibility, that they have to respect others, in order for others to respect them. Respect is earned. You do not get respected just because you happen to be a man.
Yeah.
You need to earn it.
Yeah.
And so these things that I grew up with have stayed with me. And because if a girl is brought up to believe that she has a right to respect, and she has a right to be treated with fairness, it is not likely that she will fall into the hands of a man who will treat her with disrespect or any less. I watched the way my father treated my mother with respect. He would always tell her if he was going out and where he was going. And so if you've grown up with a father like that, and then you find yourself married when you grow up to a man who you can't ask, where are you going? Then there's a problem. And my mother was, of course, the quiet type, but she was very strong in her own way. She was the kind of woman who other women in the neighborhood gravitated towards. They would come to her for advice, for protection, because she listened, and she had a way of counseling people and telling them when they were wrong, but affirming them as well. And no one who came to her left empty-handed, whether it was in terms of taking something away like food or clothing or some money. So I learned sisterly support, giving, solidarity, philanthropy from my mother.
Yeah.
And those are some of the things that have stayed with me till today.
Wow.
I remember a time when my mom, I don't know, it was something that elders did here in Uganda, but the Yoruba women back then, when we were growing up, there was something that was part of their tradition. They loved crockery. They loved dishes and plates and serving bowls and so on. It was an indicator of wealth and success So the ways in which men acquired vehicles or, all kinds of things for people to know that they had arrived and, they were people of means. Women had these huge display cabinets in their homes where they had serving bowls and dishes, and they were absolutely brilliant displays. So I don't know if you had them.
Yes, we do. Yes.
So my mother had a lot of these that she brought back with her from England. And then she acquired some. And then so she had all these things, up on the walls in the house. And then the way the tradition goes is you take out of that collection to give to your daughters.
Yes, when they start their home.
When they start their homes, when they're getting married. Yes.
Very similar.
So my mom had these sisters who lived with us, my aunties. There were at least 3 of them. And then we had 2 others as well who were cousins. So they were up to 5 all. And we were all in the same age bracket, although all of them were older than me.
Mm-hmm.
But with like maybe 5 to 6 years difference. So all these aunties, and there are a lot of them, none of them went to university. So, and then, but they went out to, the work and things like that. Then they started getting married. And then one by one, all these, aunties, took their share of all this lovely collection of dishes. So there were almost none left. And I remember asking my mom, why are you giving all these dishes away? There won't be anything left for me when it's my time or when it's my turn to get married. And my mother said to me, they need it more than you do. I didn't understand there. But now I do.
Yeah.
And so in honor of that, my mother's giving spirit, her solidarity, and to appreciate the fact that my parents gave me the means to take care of myself, a decent education, to find my place in the world. In the residences that I have collections of dishes. And when I look at them, I'm reminded that the foundation I had has made this possible.
Yeah, wow. And that's powerful. They need it more than you do. Because I think, in a sense, it went on to define your career. Like always looking out then for those who needed whatever it was more than you do. Exactly. So tell us a bit about your career. So you finished school. What do you do with yourself after that?
I attended the University of Ife in Nigeria. I went to do my National Youth Service, which is mandatory in the country, for a year. And then I went back to the University of Ife for a master's. I studied history because I loved history. After that, I went back to England. The University of Ife is now known as the Obafemi Awolowo University. And it's one of the best universities on the continent. So I went back to England in 1988. When I went back for my master's at University of Ife, that is where I met my husband, Adeleye Fayemi. He did his first degree at University of Lagos. And then he came to University of Ife to do his master's in international relations. So that when I went back to do my master's in history, I took an elective class in international relations, and that's where we met. And that was in 1986. We met in 1986. So in 1988, I went back to England. And what I wanted to do was basically to go back to work and also to pursue higher studies, maybe do a PhD or something. I just wanted to just leave the country and do other things. My husband wanted to do a PhD. So I went to England in 1988. He joined me early in 1989, and we got married a few months after that. My first job in the UK was in the civil service. Actually, that was my first proper job.
Mm-hmm. You had done others before?
Yes, my first proper job, because when I got into England, even though I was entitled to benefits as a British citizen, I thought, why would I want to sit around, on benefits when I can work? So one of my friends was working with one of these sandwich bars at Paddington railway station, known as Traveller's Fair. So she encouraged me to come along and get a job there. So I went, and they had me on the spot. So I started working as one of the sandwich makers in the kitchen at Chapters West. I did that for a couple of months. Then I'd already done my applications to the civil service, but they had written to say they were checking out references. So I had to wait for them to come back with a formal offer of employment. But I didn't want to hang around doing nothing till that time. So I went to do this work for a couple of months. And even though for a young woman, it was, and the money was, good enough to be able to pay bills and do whatever it is you had to do. But ever since I stopped working at Travelers Fair, every time I've never bought a sandwich from them since, because I've never forgotten the smell of the eggs and the pre-processed eggs and all that. So, and then I spent I think 3 weeks working in a McDonald's that was near my house. But then I started my job at the civil service in, I think that was January 1990. And that was quite interesting, because that is where, for the first time in my life, and when I tell my son this, he laughs. When I first told him that, he laughs. But I told him, you kids, you start using computers from when you are, I don't know, 3 years old, 4 years old. You start playing with, you start playing with toy computers. The first time I sat in front of a computer, I think maybe I was 23. Also, and how is that possible?
Yeah, they can't imagine.
They can't
imagine it at all.
Yeah, so that's how I learned how to use technology, computers, word processors, and so on. But what I really, really wanted to do, because I'd done my masters, the masters I'd done at University of Ife, what I really wanted to do was to continue to work around women's rights issues. And so I registered to do another master's at Middlesex University in Gender and Society. And around the same time, I went to work for an African women's organization based in London called Akinamama wa Africa.
When I saw it was already there.
Yes, Akinamama wa Africa was founded in 1985 by a group of African women living in London who had different identities. Some of them were students. Some were spouses of students. Some were asylum seekers from different parts of Africa that were going through conflict or crisis, like from South Africa, Namibia, Kenya, Uganda. And what they wanted to do basically was to sustain the links they had with the continent, with the political and social movements they were involved with back home, and also to provide support and solidarity for themselves while living in the UK. And they deliberately chose that a Swahili phrase to indicate that this was from women from the continent, because there were quite a number of spaces where African women could link up in London at the time. But they wanted to send a message that this was for African women from the continent, and was the first of its kind.
Wow.
So I joined Akinamama wa Africa in January 1991. And for me, it was a dream come true to be with a group of African women who were concerned about issues concerning women from the continent. And the organization grew. It was a small community-based organization when I joined then, but it grew because one of the things that the members of Akinamama had always wanted to do was to bring what it is we were doing and the skills and the knowledge and the resources that we had, bring some of that back to the continent. And years later, one of the ways in which I was able to make that possible was through the creation of the African Women's Leadership Institute, which we started in 1996. And we thought of a couple of African countries where we could locate it. And Uganda was top of the list because at the time we had someone in Akinamama, Sarah Mukasa, who was the president of the organization and was deeply committed to our work and who wanted to come back to Uganda at some point. So we felt, okay, if we had somebody who wants to go back to Uganda at some point and she's passionate about the organization and she shares our values and, our beliefs, why don't we see what we can do about setting up in Uganda? And then, of course, I had met Stella Mukasa, who also was from Uganda. We were both participants at the Center for Women's Global Leadership in 1994. And we told each other, we can do this for African women. So we came to set up the African Women's Leadership Institute in 1996.
Bisi, what made leadership in particular a response, an avenue for response? Because you could have chosen anything. Yeah, but why leadership?
Well, I told you that Stella and I met at this Center for Women's Global Leadership program at Rutgers University. That program was created by Charlotte Bunch, a prominent women's rights activist in the US, part of the second wave of feminist activists in the US. And the thinking of women like Charlotte was to sustain the momentum around feminist activism and women's rights gains around the world. There needed to be an understanding of what it was women needed to do based on their own priorities and their own needs in the different regions around the world. Women cannot sit in the US or Europe and decide what women of the world need. You need to ask them what their priorities are and then find a way of enabling them to achieve whatever objectives or aspirations they have. So that is how the Center for Women's Global Leadership was created, to provide this platform for women leaders around the world. And they felt that all these women leaders they were bringing together have a constituency. And it is these constituencies who can make things happen, who can make change happen in different places. So if, for example, you want to see traction around violence against women or around the education of girls, it is local actors you have to use, local women's rights organizations. They are the ones who be the policymakers. They are the ones who need the resources to be able to go out and get things done. So the strategy was to build the capacity of those leaders and create space for them to be able to feel empowered themselves and also go and create the necessary links with other sisters who felt like them where they come from. Now, so when Stella and I were we were in the class of 94, what we saw from that was there's a lot to learn from here and take back, because we were expected to take it back. And we felt there were some changes that can be made. The issues that we need to address as African women go beyond just talking about women's human rights, because they were using women's human rights as a lens for a whole range of things. So we felt what we need to do is to, as young African women leaders, is to build leadership across board. We knew that there were women who were just starting their careers in different spaces. They were starting their careers maybe in the civil service, in the academia, in the social sector, in civil society organizations. And so in all those spaces where young women were going to be engaged, provide them with the necessary training, capacity building, informational networks that they needed to, that they needed to be able to survive to get things done. And it was an experiment that became hugely successful, because we felt that as young women, aged 25 to 40, that was the way we had framed it then. We felt years down the line, it is this category of women who are going to be in positions of decision making across the continent. They would be the ministers. They are the ones who will be the members of parliament. They are the ones who will be running key women's rights organizations. And we wanted them to have the skills, the expertise, the networks to be able to do that effectively. And yesterday, when I was at the event that Akinamama Africa and the Uganda Women's Network organized around reframing the women's movement in Uganda, and they asked the alumni from the African Women's Leadership Institute to stand up. I was in tears.
Yeah.
I could not believe there were so many of them.
And this is just Uganda.
And this is just Uganda. Granted, we had quite a number of alumni from Uganda because Uganda was the host country. So when we were selecting participants, we always gave Uganda a few more participants. And then we did a couple of national leadership workshops in Uganda. But this is just Uganda. We have quite a lot of early alumni all around the continent, from quite a number in Nigeria, Ghana, and, South Africa, so many other places. And we also have countries where early alumni went back and set up organizations targeting young women, doing basically the same thing that the African Women's Leadership Institute was doing. So we have examples from Kenya, from Senegal, and Malawi. So it's been something that has been absolutely transformative, and I'm so proud of it.
Yeah. Well, do you know about how many alumni there are? And is the program still going on?
It is still going on. Akinamama is still running the hourly. And I stopped counting almost 10 years ago. And the time at which I stopped counting, the number was 6,000.
Wow.
So I've asked the Akinamama African Leadership, I've asked them to try and get figures that are more up to date. Because Akinamama Africa is going to be 40 in 2025. It was founded in 1985, so they're going to be 40 in 2025. So I've asked them to try and see if they can come up with a more accurate figure. As I said, I stopped counting 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And the number at that time was 6,000.
That's amazing. So you do the Aulis, you set up, come train women, and then where does your path take you after that?
So as Akinamama Africa was running the African Women's Leadership Institute, one of the things that kept coming up again and again was the issue of access to resources. Because when we would do follow-up with the alumni about how they were doing in their countries or in their communities, they would tell us we would have liked to do something when we went back, maybe a workshop to report back or set up an initiative, but we didn't have the resources. So after the first year, we built in a small grants program into the hourly programs for alumni to use when they go back. And that was the beginning of thinking about a fund for African women. So in 1999, three of us came together, myself, Dr. Hilda Tadria from Uganda, and Joanna Foster from Ghana. She's passed on now, may her soul rest in peace. The three of us got together and decided to set up the African Women's Development Fund. Dr. Hilda Tadria and Joanna Foster had been talking about setting up a women's fund right from 1994, before Beijing. And then they'd done some initial groundwork about it. But and then I came into it from the Akinamama Auli end, having done the small grants program, and basically we need a fund to support African women. So one day I was talking to Joanna Foster and I said, I'm so tired of all these donors who are trying to tell us what to do and then how to do it. It's about time we got serious about the fund we want to start for African women. And then Auntie Joanna looked at me and said, one fund. So I explained to her. She said, oh, but that's what Hilda and I are trying to do. And that's how we decided to join forces in 1998, 1999. And that's how the African Women's Development Fund came into being. And so we started as this feminist philanthropic organization that wanted to support the work of African women's rights organization, particularly the kinds of organizations who could not receive support from larger funders, but were doing important things in their communities. We were open to supporting well-established women's organizations as well, who wanted to do programs that they were finding it difficult to raise money for. But in the early days, the focus of our work was small grassroots women's organizations. So we started putting the organization together in the year 2000, and we began operations in the year 2001. And over time, the Secretariat of the African Women's Development Fund is based in Accra, Ghana, and we fund across the continent. I served as the first executive director from 2000 up to 2010, and I'm still on the board of the organization. And again, just like the African Women's Leadership Institute and Akinamama, I can't believe what AWDF has managed to achieve in its 24 years of existence, because AWDF is going to be 25 next year. We have funded at least 1,900 women's organizations in at least 50 African countries, and we're giving out millions of dollars in grants. And we have basically changed the narrative about what it means to do feminist philanthropy on the African continent. And I'm so proud to have been a part of that.
It's amazing. And in case you didn't know, this is FYI. So 4 years ago now, five, I think it's coming to 5. I need to do my math. When we were starting Save Fund, when the organization that I set up, Save Source, was starting a fund, okay, one of the people that we spoke to was AWDF to say, teach us, tell us, what are those things we shouldn't do, should do, can do. And so I always count that as part of we had someone to benchmark from. Indeed, in fact, when we set up our first advisory committee, we asked Dr. Hilda Tadria to chair that committee, because we said, you've done it before, we want to do it again, just teach us, help us set up. And I'm sure there are many others who have set up because of the example of AWDF. So kudos to you guys. Thank goodness to you. And I'm amazed that it's just visionary. You see things and you make them happen. That's a superpower. And so, absolutely amazed that these are the footprints that we're following in. So you do Akinamama, you do AWDF. Where next did you transition? But even before that, so how were you leaving? Because it seems sometimes to be a challenge, sometimes, of, I don't know whether it's necessarily African leaders or whether it's just a leadership thing. How are you able to let go and do something else?
I have always believed that any space you occupy is for a purpose. And you need to define what that purpose is, work at it, and after a given point in time, move on to do something else. There is no point holding on and on because there doesn't seem to be anything better to do. Because what happens is everything and everyone around you starts to grow and move on, and then you become stuck and outgrow you. They'll outgrow you. So when I was in Akinamama, we started the African Women's Akinamama Africa. Don't forget, we were based in London.
Yes.
And our primary goal was to provide support for African women living in the UK. So there were a number of programs that we were running in the UK for the benefit of African women. I started a project for African women who were in prison at the time, because it was a big issue in the UK. I started a project around African women's mental health. And there was a project that we started around African women and HIV/AIDS. And these were issues that were important to us in the African women's community then, from a policy perspective, because that was our strength at AWD, capacity to do, policy advocacy, to do high-level advocacy, and to support the efforts of other African voices in the community were trying to raise these issues, but didn't have the capacity to do so. We had quite a number of senior African women, for example, who were working in the in what we call the London boroughs, who were extremely powerful and decided on what resources communities could have and what policies could be implemented and so on. And so those sisters in those spaces were either members of Akinamama or they supported the work that we were doing in a whole number of ways. And then we added on the work that we were doing with the African Women's Leadership Institute. We were also involved with other Black and ethnic minority women in the UK at the time with addressing the marginalization of Black communities in what was then known as buttressed Europe when the European Union came to be. So we were founding members of the Black Women in Europe network. And it was a long process. It was very engaging, but we were a critical part of that. And so our work took us around the European continent to support the work of other Black women or African women in those countries. And then there was the international angle to it, because those were the years when the United Nations was doing all these international conferences. And the environmental conference in Rio, the Vienna Human Rights Conference in 1993, then the Cairo Population Conference in 1994, then the Beijing Conference in 1995. So in all those spaces, Akinamama Africa played an active role to raise the voices of African women living in Europe as well as African women on the continent. Yes. So I had done all this work for 10 years. I was young. I was full of energy, but I was tired. And I felt, all this work that we are doing, the next phase of this work would need to be literally on the African continent. We were doing work with the continent, for the continent, but I wanted to be on the continent. And then my husband too, at the time, had finished his studies and his doctorate degree. And he wanted us to move back to the continent. We couldn't do so immediately because of the political situation, but then things changed. The military dictatorship came to an end, so civic space became open for us to be able to walk in. So my husband moved back to Nigeria. He was the founder of the Center for Democracy and Development. It had been established in the UK and in Ghana, and so he moved back to establish an office in Nigeria. And around that time, Akinamama had started hosting the African Women's Development Fund as a project within Akinamama, with the understanding that eventually it was going to be independent. For me, that was my exit strategy, and I was very clear and transparent with the Akinamama board that I would like to leave in another year or two, and what I would like to do next is work on the African Women's Development Fund, but it's not going to be based here in London. It's going to be based on the continent because that's where the needs are, right? So that's how I transited out of Akinamama Africa. It was seamless. It was, very affirming to all parties. And even though my colleagues were very sorry to see me go, they fully understood that it was time. I told them 10 years, it's enough. And, I was part of the recruitment process for a new executive director who I supported and mentored even after she had taken over, for her to be able to carry on the organization. Now, at the African Women's Development Fund, again, we started off small, then we started to grow and grow and grow in terms of budget size, staff size, and everything, reach across the continent. Yeah. And I reached across the continent, and our relevance in the women's movement. Sometime in 2005, my husband, who at the time I told you was still with the Center for Democracy and Development, he was approached by elders and leaders from his home state of Ekiti State, which is one of the 36 states we have in Nigeria. So he was approached by the leaders of his state, and he was asked to come home and try and run for governor of his state. They said they have been watching him, and they felt that he had the right kind of values, the right kind of exposure and networks, and they felt he was a man of courage and convictions. Remember, I told you he was one of those who was involved in the pro-democracy movement, Rally Gorilla Radio, and they felt this is the kind of leader that we need to take us places. And so that's how my husband got drafted into politics. In 2010, October, my husband then became governor of Ekiti State. By that time, I was planning to move out of AWDN because 2009, I was trying to move move on in 2011, because 2011 would have made it 10 years that I'd been ED. So I was planning to move out in 2011, and I'd actually started, putting my transition plan together. I'd written up the transition proposal, for the board and everything. And then my husband became governor in October 2010. So that meant I had to fast track my departure. So I moved back to Ekiti State to support his work, and that's how I became first lady of Ekiti State in Nigeria. So I was first lady of Ekiti State for 2 terms, from 2010 to 2014, and then from 2018 to 2022. And it was a very interesting time.
Yes, wow. So from civil society, so it's like you've done full circle. Civil service to civil society, then to politics. And what was that like?
It was very interesting.
Yeah.
I learned a lot.
Are there things you had assumed from the outside that you found were absolutely different on the inside?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in civil society and part of social justice movements, women's movements, we have all these assumptions about how things should be straightforward. 2 + 2 should be 4. So we have this mindset of black and white. Politics doesn't work that way, particularly politics that involves our local communities. Politics is not 2 + 2 equals 4. It was 4. And it's not black and white. There are always shades of gray. So this is something that my husband and I had to learn. Of course, there are, instances where you draw the line and say, no, there are things I will not do. And actually, it is because of positions like that my husband lost his re-election in 2014. Because we are now to serve for 2 terms. And my husband's first term was 2010 to 2014. And he performed very well. And all the, opinion polls, all the things that people were saying about him pointed to the fact that he had done very well and his second term should be taken for granted. And to everyone's shock, it did not happen like that. We actually lost the election with a landslide.
Oh, wow.
And there were 2 reasons for that. First of all, at that time, our party in Ekiti State was in opposition to the federal government, because there was a different party at the federal government level. And so at subnational level, we were in a different party. And so, in many of our countries, there are ways in which the government at the federal level can deal with you when they want to teach you a lesson.
Yes.
So when it was time for the elections were heavily militarized. And it suppressed our votes. And our voters, our political leaders were handed out of town, so they were not available to help mobilize our people and support them. So it made life extremely difficult for us. So that was one part of it. The other part was there was a narrative that was fueled by both our own party members and the opposition. And it started from our own party people. And it was a very strange narrative, but it gained currency. Like, we know Dr. Fayemi has done well. He's a good leader. He has built roads. He built schools. He built clinics and hospitals, or at least refurbished them. He gave social welfare benefits to the elderly people, which was the first of its kind in Nigeria. He's done a lot of things, but all that is physical and social infrastructure. He has not built our stomach infrastructure. So what they had been expecting my husband to do was to put money into their hands for them to use as they want. For them to get contracts that would never be implemented, so they could just take the contracts, get the money out of the system and spend. And apparently that was business. That's the way business was done in quite a number of places. And my husband said, that's not the game I'm going to play. That's not the kind of leader I want to be. I was voted to do certain things for my people. I have a social contract with my people that I need to make sure that I carry out. These are the reasons why I was voted, and this is what I'm going to be assessed on, not how much I put into your hands.
Yeah.
So they waited for the election, and that's how they voted him out. So it was, so as I said, there was a combination of two things. It was probably more on the side of the militarization of the elections, but that narrative was a powerful one. It was a damaging one.
Yes.
But the good thing that came out of that was a lot of people from the state, progressive people, young and old, and those from the diaspora, from within the country who were not living in the state, and those who were outside of the country, they were scandalized. And so they spent the next couple of years doing a lot of awareness and sensitization around, do you really understand what this means? Do you understand the choices that you are making when you are electing leaders and what you're electing them for?
Mm-hmm.
And so we had elections in 2014. They went that way. In 2015, we had national elections, and President Muhammadu Buhari came to power. And that means our party and the APC then got into power at the federal level. And my husband was invited to join President Buhari's cabinet. So my husband became a cabinet minister. So in 2018, when it was time for Ekiti State to have governorship elections again, people now invited him to come and run it.
So you guys had to move to Lagos?
So when he was minister, we were in Abuja.
Abuja, rather.
So when he became governor second time around in 2018, we moved back to Ekiti. And this time we won the election with a landslide.
Wow.
And initially I didn't want him to do it. Because the loss of that election in 2014 was very painful.
Mm.
And when I talk about painful, I'm not talking about losing an election. Because for me, okay, you win elections or you lose elections. And before he got to be governor in December 2010, we'd had a number of court cases involving elections. His first election was actually 2017. And we lost that and we went to court to challenge it. And we won appeals, lost appeals, won again, lost again, back and forth. And eventually he was declared winner in October 2010. So it wasn't strange to me, the yo-yos of political wins and losses. What hurt was the fact that we had a number of friends and confidants who had been part of our inner circle, who we had sat together with to strategize, to conceptualize, who have been an integral part of the administration. And the moment we lost the election, these were the first people to issue diary, to go all over the place saying all kinds of things. That was very painful. And this should be a lesson to any leader who finds themselves in a position of prominence. You need to be extremely careful about your circle.
Yeah.
Hang on to people who you have grown up with, who you have known, for a long time, who knew you when you were nothing, when you didn't have anything. Not those who come to you when the light is shining on you. Because once that light is seemed to be dimming or has dimmed, they will move on to the next person. And it wouldn't even have been a big deal if they had gone away quietly to the next person. They go away and they create all kinds of narratives. Oh, this person. And people will believe it because they were your people or they were perceived to be your peoples.
Yes.
So, but then for people who are, and for your listeners who happen to be persons of faith, as human beings, we need to be very careful. It doesn't really matter whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or what your faith is. We just need to understand that the universe works in very mysterious ways. We are not God.
Yeah.
Nobody knows tomorrow. Nobody would have dreamed that my husband would go back when he did in 2018. And so some of those people who went around spreading those narratives, doing all kinds of things, saying all kinds of things, then started coming back, tail between legs to apologize or to tell stories in defense of themselves. So the lesson again I learned from that is, and then you are put in this position where you either want to shoo them away and tell them, if you didn't want to have anything to do with me when I had lost, then why should you be my friend now? So that could have been one way of doing it. Or the way my husband and I chose to then react was, the reason why we are here is because the universe or God believes we should be. So if God has shown us mercy, who are we not to show mercy to others? So people then will then go around saying, oh, Bisi has such a large heart, the governor has such a large heart. Maybe not. But I believe it was a way of God testing. God tested me and my husband. Okay, I've given you this grace and this mercy. Let me see what you will do with it. And I did not want to fail that test.
Yeah.
So, unlike what happened in 2014 when everything just collapsed and it was just, it was just an unbelievable shambles after all the ad hoc that we had put in. My husband would leave home at 7 in the morning and he would not come back home till 2 in the morning. Sometimes if I don't call him around maybe between 12 and 1 to get him to start winding down, he could even be there. And if I'm out of town, and I don't, so I'm not there to call him to harass him, he might be there till 3 before you come start. Yeah. And then, 7, he's out again. And so in 2018, we had that opportunity to go back. And 2022, when we were leaving, it was totally different. When we were leaving, there was this grand send-off from people in the state. Everybody trooped out. People were in tears. And so I thought, thank God, at least, this ended the way it has done. And my father had said something to me when I was young about politics. Because I'd asked him why he never became a politician. He was a senior civil servant and very upright person, very forthright as well, outspoken. And my father said, politics, it's not for people like me who like to tell the truth. And then he said, also politics is something that can give you many highs. And it can also smash you into pieces. I'd never forgotten that, and it came true. So, but I really valued those years because it gave me an opportunity to scale up all the work I've been doing around women's rights. So during those 8 years, when I was first lady of Ekiti State, I did a lot of work around the status of women in the state. And because I'm a policy advocate and I'm a firm believer in legal and policy frameworks, I was able to push for at least 7 bills to promote women's rights in the state. And those bills included a gender-based violence prohibition bill, a gender and equal opportunities law, a sexual offences, the treatment, care and protection law for minors bill, a mental health law, a HIV anti-stigma law, and a number of others like that. These 7 laws. And then there were some policies that we put in place as well, which included a sex offenders law. So we have a sex offenders register rather. We have a sex offenders register in Ekiti State. So if you are convicted of a sexual offense, you go into the sex offenders register. And then we also had a school-related GPV policy as well. And then Ekiti State was the first state in Nigeria to domesticate the national gender policy. So which means the state has a roadmap to work with when it comes to gender equality and women's empowerment. In addition to those legal and policy frameworks, I also did a lot of work on promoting women in political leadership. And now the landscape has changed for women in Ekiti when it comes to leadership. You can test it out by calling anyone you know from Nigeria, or if you happen to know anyone who knows someone from Ekiti State, and you can ask them to say, when it comes to Ekiti women now, don't joke with them because they now have a voice. So it's important for women in our communities to have a voice, to have a champion. And it could be anyone.
And I think what I learned from you, Bisi, is also what are you doing with your platform for because we're given these things, like you said, for a purpose, for a reason. So at whatever place you're placed, what are you using that platform for? And as we wind down our conversation, I know you have another platform in this season of your life. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Okay. So, and before I go into that, to just wind up on what I was saying, because it's then a segue into this phase I'm in. So, as First Lady of Ekiti State, I did a lot of work on legal and policy frameworks. I worked on women's involvement in leadership and political participation. I helped build strong networks of solidarity for women in the state. And I also did the work around sexual and gender-based violence and put in place structures and support systems like a sexual assault referral center, like a shelter and vocational center for women and girls in distress, and a range of things like that. And I also had an opportunity to scale that up to the national level, because at some point during my husband's second term, he became the chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum, which meant he was responsible for working with other governors as their coordinator. So I then became the chair of the Nigerian Governors Wives Forum. And in 2020, when the COVID pandemic was raging, the sexual violence pandemic was something we were all concerned about. So we used that as an opportunity as governors' wives to get involved in that work in our different states. So because I had the experience of doing that from Ekiti State, I was able to provide support to other first ladies across the country. So at that time, in June 2020, when we started doing this work, only 13 states in Nigeria had domesticated the violence against person prohibitions law that had been passed as far back as 2015. And when we got together as governors' wives to do this, one of the first things we did was write a letter to our husbands at the Nigerian Governors Forum, asking them to declare a state of emergency against sexual and gender-based violence in Nigeria, which they did on June 10th. And it's historic, the first of its kind in Africa. And after the state of emergency was declared, this was June 10th, 2020. So after the state of emergency against GBV was declared, the first ladies then went back to their states to put pressure on their husbands and other stakeholders in their state to make sure that the laws were passed if they had not already been passed, and if they had been passed, to ensure that there was a pathway to implementation.